All right. Well, we are, I think this is episode 3. We're going through this journey. We are the world singers, which is a very, humble title we've taken upon ourselves. But basically, we're just a group of friends who love the cosmere that Brandon Sanderson created, and especially the Stormlight archives. And we're just taking a journey through the books, taking it section by section, well, half a section at a time, and just talking about different themes, different ideas that struck us in the week. And if you find this interesting, we hope you enjoy it. If not, there are literally billions of hours worth of other content on YouTube for your consuming pleasure. So we don't feel too bad if you don't. But anyhow, so this week we focused on the end of the first section of The Way of Kings. So from chapter 20 or so to the end of that section. And since I'm starting, I'll just get the ball rolling. I focused this week, the thing that kind of jumped out to me, the thing that I was intrigued by was how Sanderson kind of discusses ideas of economics and healthcare within the world that he's created. And the scene or the issue that for me brought that to the head was when Kaladin was trying to figure out a way to get extra money to do some extra things for Bridge 4. At this point, he's decided, okay, I'm gonna try, I'm gonna do what I can. And he figures out that if he can get this substance called knobweed sap, which is kind of like, there's a plant that grows wild somewhere around the Shattered Plains, that he can sell it, and it's like a antiseptic, and there's money in it, etc. So he does that, and there's intrigue in all of that. But what's really interesting is that he goes to sell it to an apothecary, that's how I say it. Now, someone translate for the American audience.
An apothecary.
Yeah, there you go. That's what I meant to say. Anyway, so he goes to that place, and we basically discover that there's almost like a racket going on. The guy there is not excited to find out that he's found a bunch of these plants and that he's been able to milk them. And he tries to kind of like fob him off with this line, like, oh, it's not really that valuable, and we have to distill it, and do this. I'll give you a few spears, and But anyway, eventually, Kaladin kind of figures out that something's not quite right, and the guy kind of spills the beans that basically there's like this racket that they have with the war camps where they find this stuff relatively cheap, growing wild, and then they milk it and they sell it at a great markup to the war camps. And of course, they need, buckets and buckets of it because the soldiers are getting injured. And so Kaladin is kind of like incensed because, growing up as a surgeon's son, in a small town where his dad did most of his work for like, meals and whatever people could afford, it's like shocking to him to see the amount of money that they're charging for it. And but the guy's answer is basically, well, they're harvesting all these gem hearts, they have all this money, it's not like they miss any of this money, so better that it goes into my pocket than it goes into the pocket, stays in the pocket of someone like Bright Lord Sadius or whatever. And it just made me kind of think about the idea in general of how the economics of war, how if war doesn't make money, we don't tend to fight those wars. And there's a lot that we could get into on that. I don't necessarily want to turn this into a political thing, but that's just an interesting thing. And then the economics of healthcare, where there are lots of medicines, or lots of things that could be made, but we tend to only make medication for diseases that are profitable. So the kinds of people who have those diseases have to be people who have insurance or have the money to pay for them, etc. And that's just kind of interesting. So for me, it was just interesting how Sanderson kind of took those same ideas, but then wove it into this fictional world. So, and if any of you have any reflections on any of that.
Yeah, it's a really great example of just the utility. This is obviously kind of a zoomed out view of the science fiction fantasy genre where you can use, these narratives that are in many ways super tangible, to talk about subjects that are extremely real in a very parable-esque way. And I think really kind of highlights the power of story. Like, that's such a nuanced and politically rife subject, healthcare and economics and the economy of healthcare. And yet here in the middle of a story about like a dude talking to a wisp of wind,
Right.
and something called a horn eater, we're like also interacting with that is like, I think, a really cool, just zoomed out experience.
That's an ability that this art form has, or that the fiction has. I just recently went through the Lord of the Rings trilogy again, and then kind of as it was done, decided I wanted to start hitting those behind the scenes DVDs, kind of getting into stuff again. And then one of the first ones when they're talking about Tolkien and what he set out to write, and how he did it. I remember one of the doctors of Tolkien literature or whatever it was on there talked about how people say that people make the accusation of people who get into this kind of stuff that it's escapism. And he responded and said, I think it's the exact opposite of that. Like, you are confronted with real things that your own mind sometimes won't allow you to be confronted with in nonfiction or in the real world. That there are concepts and things put before you. Because if you take the Way of Kings, just this one first book, I mean, at its core, there is a lot of examination that this story does in racism. I mean, that's, and not just the Way of Kings. I mean, that's a major thread throughout the entire Cosmere.
Yeah.
If you haven't, read the Mistborn trilogy, just the way that even begins is basically on a plantation, and so they're just able to explore things that normally we would like put up our wall against. We would filter out as being, as like whatever side you lean towards, you would be like, oh, I hear that you're coming from the other side, so I'm just already putting up my defenses and I'm thinking in my mind's arguments against you. Whereas instead, in a form like this, you're reading it and you're just thinking about like, oh man, that sucks for people who live on Rashar, and it actually allows you to engage with thinking about the meaning of it on a human level, even though it's a fantasy world.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of the, it's just one in a line of many examples that Sanderson is kind of painting in Roshar, that the honor is dead, that they're, it seems like everything that they do, like almost every aspect of their society is functioning dishonorably, I mean, even the war itself, like it was an honorable, decision to go to war to avenge, an assassinated king. But now, like 5-6 years later, they're basically there to collect gem hearts, right? They're not there to actually avenge the king anymore.
Yeah, and to organize a fantasy sports league around it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting that Syl, who is a child of honor, so to speak, she has this ability to find this knobweeb. Like, she has this ability to turn that industry around so that this antiseptic can be readily available, in larger quantities for a lower price, like Honor is capable of doing it right, but they intentionally choose to do it the hard way because there's more money in it that way.
That's interesting.
I think it's a really like thematically, I think it is really interesting to sort of like and Bridge 4 does this a lot, actually, I think, where Bridge 4 kind of takes sort of both a fantasy trope of like, you know, well, you just need a fellowship of 9 and you can take over the world and change everything. But it's also sort of a like history and real world trope where we tend to just kind of view like, you know, things happen because one person, like one great person did it, instead of it being a systemic thing. And I think Bridge 4 really kind of like in a cool way illustrates like, you know, actually like just as important as the like guy who can wield magic powers is the guy who can cook really good stew. And just to, and the guy who carries the water, and the, you know, and the guys that gather up weeds, you know, for, and I think Bridge 4 like really illustrates like there's actually like the potential for doing something great in almost any sort of vocation and undertaking when it is connected with something great.
Which is Vorinism, isn't it? I mean, just
what it's supposed to be.
Yeah, like which in a sense, like Vorinism is a kind of a hollow reflection of a genuine spirituality that is out there, and a genuine history, a genuine story that it's connected to. Much the same as I feel like, from my experience and point of view, that much of not genuine Christianity, but definitely Christendom, like cultural Christianity, is a hollow shell of something that it is genuinely spiritual and real and historical.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting how their, you know, Vorinism gives them the permission to act dishonorably, because they argue that, you know, well, the greatest thing is to fight and to train, and we don't necessarily have to win this war. It's okay to compete for the gem hearts because we're kind of preparing these soldiers, you know, for the next life, for the real fight. And so this whole system basically is sanctioned by the, you know, by the Ardents and by that whole thing, which is, you know, again, treading on some landmines here, but, you know, a lot of the policies, and even you know, maybe the machinery of war itself, you know, in the Western world, certainly in America, is very much tied to this sense of there being a righteousness is on our side. You know, God is with us, and so, you know, in the name of that, then, and in the name of freedom, in the name of preserving the freedoms that we have, that arguably were, you know, God given, you know, through, you know, the founders, how, you know, how you see that, it means that you can do things and you don't have to think too deeply about it. And that's not to throw shade on any individual person or any individual, you know, veteran or whatever the case may be, but I do think that, and we'll get into this, I'm sure, but characters like Yasna and others who are kind of just, and Dananan to some extent now, who's like critically reevaluating all that they thought they have known and that they thought has been true, you know, starts to tear at the cracks of this society, which I guess ultimately will kind of implode in itself. But I think these abuses that we see, kind of, they reach a certain tipping point, and then, like, necessarily almost the system starts to crumble because of the extremes of where things have gone.
This kind of ties in, you know, where we, at least we were within the story, maybe if not thematically, ties into the thing that I had thought about talking about this week. So is it a good time to transition into that? So the scene that captivated my mind was that scene of Teft and Rock and Kaladin sitting and milking those knobweed stems under the guise of making Kaladin a Luffy hat, I'm sure. I'm very glad that got a good response out of you there, Ishik.
So excited.
Yeah, any One Piece reference is just gold for Brad. I know that as a fact. So what jumped out to me about that interaction, that moment there, was that Kaladin, he felt inspired. It was a spiritual thing. I think it's the beginning of his spiritual awakening that he had at the end of part 1 at the chasm, at the honor chasm, when he came back from that. And he knew what his mission was. He knew that, like, to boil it down simply, my mission statement is they've already lost everything. I'm just going to try to save and help people as much as I can that have no hope, And so he goes back to this bridge crew and begins trying to lead them towards hope. And it struck me that the first thing that he went to was authority, right? I'll play drill sergeant. I'll get in their faces. I'll make an example out of Moash. And then the next thing he goes from, because authority doesn't work, he goes towards inspiration. You know what? I'm going to grab that plank over there and I'm going to just have them watch me work out. And they're going to be like, man, that guy's got it figured out, and they'll want to join me, right? and that doesn't seem to get him what he needs. And then he does this like courageous leadership thing in battle where he takes Rock's place at the front. And then even saving them, even physically going towards, like, I'm going to not leave you behind. I'm going to save your life. Others even join in on that, but they get back. And when it comes down to it, you have these broken people still who aren't even willing to share their food, in order to save a life.
Mm-hmm.
And the click, that the lights that come on in Kaladin's heart and mind are in that conversation he has with Rock and Tef, where he realizes, this is what I'm missing. What I'm missing is this sitting around together, laughing about putting chol dung in Sadius's burrito, right? Like that. This is what we're missing, is just this genuine social, like, connection, this friendship, this place of belonging, this unpressured place of belonging too. Just like, sitting around the fire together is not the place where you feel like pressured to perform. That's just like, the work is done and you're just there Sabbathing, literally, like just relaxing together around the fire. And that's where he realizes that's what's needed. And that's the thing that starts to turn everything around. Okay, so where that has me, and I just want to kind of flip the conversation to you guys, is thinking, like, when it comes to church, do we overinflate the importance of the bigger things and miss that what people just are genuinely needing is a place to sit around the fire with each other? And we think it's about our great sermons and our inspirational leadership and our motivation and all the different things we're going to do, but when it comes down to it, that's not the ticket.
Wow, that's so interesting. So what you're saying is Kaladin discovered Sabbath. I like that. I'm glad that that's where we've taken this. I think you're absolutely right. I think what's happening now with the COVID-19 is kind of demonstrating how much of the things that we do, and this isn't a spoiler by this point, but if you're watching, all of us are, I think I didn't say this in the introduction, all of us are in one way, shape or form or the other, ministry professionals, chaplain, pastors, whatever, what we're discovering, at least what I'm discovering now, is that the stuff that we usually do on a week by week or weekend by weekend basis has changed dramatically, and still people want to in some way connect. And so even though in terms of just quality, there's far better quality Christian content out there. Every week, the members of my church community gather together in some way so that they can be with each other, even if it's just through Zoom or all watching the same YouTube feed at the same time. So I think you're right. I think what it is that we have to offer that's of real value is that community. And what's sad is that I feel like I spend so much time doing everything but sitting around the fire with a bowl of stew. And if I do, we have to debate, well, what kind of wood is for the fire and what can go in the stew. And I wish that, we could just get to the part where we actually do it,
Yes. Yes. And to be a little more vulnerable and personal than I ought to be with this format, I find it difficult to go there when I'm in the capacity of being the professional leader. Like with you guys, no problem. We get around the fire. When I'm not the professional leader who's on site with you guys wearing that hat, we get around, no problem at all. But I have trouble even letting my own I have trouble letting my own professional ardent robe hang down and just being around the fire. Even though honestly, so for people who are ministry leaders, I think I'm probably more on the end of being casual and authentic. Like I'm probably on that end of the spectrum. But even still there, it's not a place that I tend to feel that actual letting down of everything and relaxing that I would in a context where I'm not the professional.
I mean, in some ways, Dalinar's story and Adelin's story too kind of plays with just what you're talking about, Rob. I mean, this team, like there is sort of very much this class tension in our stories here between light eyes and dark eyes for the Alethi, where we're kind of constantly jumping back and forth between perspectives, where the light eyes are sort of very much, they have barriers between where even you can get around, to use the illustration, the fire together, but like culturally, it's like they're not using the same weapons, they're not eating the same food, they're not in the same places, they can't do the same things. So there are sort of like these cultural barriers, and the dark eyes sort of like have this resentment that pulls them away, and Kaladin obviously like very strongly, and the light eyes sort of have this cultural force behind like being distant, where you have like Adolin, who seems like pretty interested in just getting around the fire with anybody, and Dalinar seems to really relish in that once Bridge 4 becomes his sort of like personal protectorate. So that sort of tension between, very much so in classes here, I think is a reality in church perspectives, as well as obviously other perspectives, whenever there is a hierarchy, whether we call it a hierarchy or not.
From a different angle even, it's fascinating when you read, like in the last part of the book, where Kaladin was feeling depressed and was wanting to give up, and he was kind of noting that kind of one of the reasons why they weren't getting around the fire and singing and eating and learning each other's names was because they had no hope. Like they just thought, I could die tomorrow, you could die tomorrow, what's the point in learning your name? And I wonder, like, as a church, like, and I don't know, maybe this is mostly a problem in our denomination, or maybe this is a problem in all denominations, but it seems like there's kind of a resistance to get around the fire, so to speak. There's I think Vistim had mentioned that, like, as the professional ministers, like we feel like we have to preach and all this stuff, but there's also an expectation of that coming from our members too. You know, like they want to come, they want to hear a sermon, and they want to leave, you know, for the most part. And I wonder if like that resistance to be vulnerable, that resistance to open up, to connect, in the church setting, is it also somehow related to a lack of hope or a sort of pessimism about life? I don't know.
Yeah. So when I started this this particular train of conversation that we're on, what I said was maybe we don't realize that all those other things we think are so important aren't that important. You know, the inspiring speech and the display of leadership and the, you know, Kaladin's actual, I mean, he's not aware of it at the time, but he's awakening as a radiant, right? And maybe that's not what's as important. But maybe the key isn't that you just need one or the other. Maybe the key is kind of everything in balance kind of coming together, because you don't just need to just, you know, let's just get around the fire and go through the motions of, you know, doing that. Like there is also something to be said for the depth of reality of their situation, that they recognize the preciousness of life, that they have it in the moment, that there's something to be said for the subtle awakening and leveling up of people that is going to be happening amongst them. You know, like there is an apocalyptic element, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, and also, if you think about it, Kaladin wouldn't have had Rock if it wasn't for his example leadership, you know, going out there, you know, and he wouldn't have had Teft if he didn't try the drill sergeant approach, you know, like he kind of appealed to different needs of leadership, you know, and then of course he got a bunch of the other guys by just sitting around the fire. But yeah, I think that makes sense, that you kind of need to approach it from different angles, because different people need different types of leadership.
Yeah, but I think the thing about the sitting around the fire, why I think that's so brilliant that you noticed it, Robin, obviously the silence and put it in, is that that's not an ability. That is like a context, you know, and it's a place where people get to share their stories, and I think that's so key. I was reflecting on what you were saying, Rob, about the idea of how sometimes we struggle to do that, and I was just re-listening to the section where the first night where they have the gathering around the fire thing, Gaz kind of comes over, who's kind of the leader over all of the, you know, the bridge units, to kind of just check to see what they're doing, and he kind of is suspicious, and he's thinking maybe they're breaking some rules. Turns out that they aren't, and Kaladin offers him some of the stew, and he like immediately like dismisses it as if, no, there's no way, you know, Lordling, I'm going to sit down and eat stew with you. And it made me think that sometimes maybe the reason why we struggle is because in many of our, you know, leadership contexts, we are more in the role of a Gaz than we are in the role of a Kaladin. So, you know, Gaz is thinking about overall making sure that all of the bridges run and function, and, you know, if they don't meet their numbers, his you know, sergeant or, you know, conference president will you know, make a big deal about that. He's not really trying to build relationships with any of the individual bridges. They're all pieces in the puzzle to him, and, you know, if some die, he gets some more, and that's fine. He doesn't have to do any of the bridge runs. He just like charts it up and then sends them out to do it. Whereas obviously Kaladin is a leader. In many ways, he's a better leader than Gaz, but he's actually in it with his bridge. And even though at first those leadership models maybe aren't fully effective, I think the fact that he's actually with them doing it makes all the difference. And I feel that a lot of times, maybe I'm just reflecting for myself, I find myself more in a Gaz type of position where I'm trying to mobilize different groups of people to do things to fulfill a bigger vision. And sometimes it's difficult when you've placed yourself, or you've been placed in that position, to then come and sit down at the campfire. And sometimes my challenge is, there are 7 campfires. Which one do I sit at this week? And, so I don't know, maybe that's kind of taking it a little bit too far out of the world. But I do think that the fact that Kaladin is just focusing on this specific relatively small group of bridgemen allows him to be able to build those relationships that then make the rest of the whole transformation possible.
So I'm really glad you brought this up, Rob, because it kind of expands what I wanted to bring up in a way I really hadn't considered at all. So I don't want to stop the conversation, but just kind of see where this fits in. So I wanted to cheat a little bit because last time we got together, I feel like we didn't give enough time to talking about how awesome the chapter where I think it's chapter 12, where they fight the great shell that shows up out of nowhere is. Like, such a great, like, it's a short chapter, but it's one of my favorite chapters in the book, because we've sort of been setting up Dalinar for a while now as like this really awesome, like, I mean, major, I would use more extensive language, but he's supposed to be this like amazing blackthorn. But we've only kind of seen him weak and confused, and like people are kind of not sure if he's going insane or what. And we get to that chapter and he catches a great shell's sort of like claw in his hand, and like, awesome chapter. And it sort of got me thinking about like Dalinar's mission, which is to unite them. Like, he has this sense that his job is to unite them. And really, we've spent, I guess, most of the first 3 books, like him sort of puzzling out really what that means. And his initial response to unite them is, we need to leave the Shattered Plains, drop the Vengeance Pact, go back home where it's safe, sort of circle the wagons and get nice with each other again. So like his first response, his first concept of like, how do I unite them, is let's leave the battlefield. Let's go back to our, sort of protected home and figure out how to, be united there. And then, that obviously transitions quite a bit through this book and moving forward. But I found that to be like a really interesting insight into how like groups unite. So I feel like most people start in the same place Dalinar started. Like, to unite, we have to step away from the purpose we're uniting for. So we have to step back from the purpose we're uniting for. In this case, like fighting the Parshendi is what they think they're uniting. He's uniting them for, stopping a desolation. We need to stop pursuing that purpose so we can like regroup and unite. And it seems like that's what we do in a lot of different ways. And how I feel like it's really interesting is I never really considered that Bridge 4 and Kaladin is sort of a microcosm of what Dalinar is trying to do. Like Kaladin is uniting Bridge 4 and is in many ways sort of like blueprinting the uniting process that Dalinar sort of like is wrestling through in a macro sense.
See, if Dalinar were Kaladin, if you're taking these stories, which that's amazing, like the parallels that I'd never seen there. If you're taking that way, if Dalinar were Kaladin, then he would be trying to like meet with the leaders of the other bridge crews and Gaz and like the other guy who's over them, and like trying to, like politically like get all the leaders on the same page and stuff like that. Kaladin eventually like secures the freedom of every bridge crew by focusing on his one bridge crew. By just entering in and doing that. And like Kaladin doesn't know, like he hasn't been burdened with this task of unite them. He's just doing it. And yeah, you're right. Dalinar is going about it in this big sense. And also, I always felt like when I read through the books the first time, I actually really like harmonized with Dalinar's story, and totally I was with him in thinking, yeah, you got to unite these high princes. And it wasn't until later, at least for me, and I don't know if it's just the way that I read it, but I don't sense that the burden to unite them was placed on him at all for the leaders. It was to unite all of the Radiants who were waking up. Like that's what I hear Honor, telling him from the past in these visions is, hey, the Radiants are going to come. You need to unite them, bring them together. And I feel like that is so applicable even to me now, to stop and think to myself, what do I think of as my job? What do I think of as my, like, the people that I have been tasked to lead? And am I focused on what I think is my mission, not realizing the entire time that my mission are these like dying bridge runners around me? And who are they? What does that look like?
Yeah. I love that. That's so cool, because I feel like Dalinar, his first thoughts is about the institution. It's about, and again, just speaking from our context, so often at times of crisis, the thing that we try to preserve are the institution. Like you talked before about the idea of Christendom, that this echo of what was once a very real thing, and Dalinar is being told this very real thing is going to like re-emerge. 4,500 years or so has passed since the last time, whatever, and it's about to come again. And he's worrying about how to get the different high princes, which map fairly neatly in our context to union presidents or whatever, to like work together on this big project, and missing that in his own war camp, they're like, there's this teenager, or how old is Kaladin, like 20, like messing with Spren and stuff. You know what I mean? Like he misses all of that because he's trying to figure out how to get them to, to have the gem hearts more equally distributed or whatever. And I think, and just speaking transparently, we've been fairly transparent in this episode, and we've had conversations where we've all expressed like deep levels of frustration with where we are in life, even though we love the calling on the life, but like deep feelings of frustration and sometimes impotence. But I think the reason why we feel that way sometimes, at least I do, is because I'm trying to make changes or try to advocate for things in these systems, when really maybe I should be looking for these people to gather around the fire. And I don't know what that looks like for on Dalinar's level, like, but eventually, of course, he does, like, that does happen as the narrative goes along. But I just really love the connection of those two ideas. It's so cool.
Yeah, I mean, Dalinar gets kind of to the gather around the fire not until book 3, really, right? Like when they're in Urithiru and they're like trying to figure out, all right, now what?
Yeah.
And isn't it so rewarding? Like so rewarding when you get to the end of book 2 and when Dalinar finally connects with Shallan. And then finally, like the moment when Kaladin comes out of the chasm with Shallan and the glory sprint pop around, the shock sprint or whatever they were, pop around Dalinar's head. And you're just like, yes, please. You want these to get together, like so bad. You just want the one that is like being like called by Honor and Honor's sprint to like come unite everyone. And then the ones that are actually like rising up in Honor. But why is that so hard? Like, is that the journey before the destination? Like, is there a required journey before destination before you can even get the super team together? Like, what would have happened if they had been connected right away? What would have happened if Kaladin had been sold into Dalinar's camp from the beginning? Never was a bridge runner. I mean, he's already bonding a Spren at the time, but like, would Kaladin Stormblessed have really
Yeah, I mean, it's like he needed the absolute rock bottom experience of Bridge 4 in order to become who he is, you know, and Shalon really needed her journey to become who she was, you know. Yeah.
They are, to use a phrase, you know, from more Christian, they're all going through these wilderness experiences. You know, Kaladin has been on an extended one. Shalon has been on an extended one as well, frankly. And we find out eventually that Dalinar has been on an extended wilderness experience, you know, where they are kind of being stripped away to their base selves in a lot of ways. I think it's really like, I like what we're kind of going to, because I've been really trying to wrap my head around sort of Dalinar seemingly like dealing with what he's been called to do in sort of different ways. Like he knows he has to like stop the desolation and the Everstorm and all that, and he knows he needs to unite them. And it takes him a really, really long time to get to like oh, those are the same thing. Like it takes him a long time to figure out the way to unite them is to actually go stop the Everstorm, or at least try to. But for a while, he's sort of like, all right, I need to unite them first before we can go do the other thing. And like there's this whole, seems to have this whole sense of like, I have work to do before I can start accomplishing the work I'm supposed to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel really like I really connect with that, both like on a personal level, but also just like looking at church and the world, where it seems really easy to sort of like feel like I need to do all this stuff before I can start doing the thing. And you know, there's some tension between like, am I going to be focused on the people, or am I going to be focused on the purpose? But it seems like what happens for both Dalinar and Kaladin is like those things happen in concert. Like Dalinar, when he finally is just like, actually, I'm just going to go strike at the Parshendi. And it turns out they're not even the problem, but I'm just going to go. And that's when he meets Kaladin. And I think like I don't know, there's something there about life, like putting those two things together, maybe like church, personally, systemically, whatever.
Yeah, I think that works even on like in a personal life level. Like there are so many things I've wanted to do that I have not done because I felt like I needed to do stuff before I could get there, and I didn't have all the resources, and I didn't have, like, literally right now there are 2 apple trees sitting out in the rain in my yard that I bought like 3 weeks ago that I haven't planted yet, because I'm trying to find the perfect planting apple tree method. Like I do this to myself all the time, and I just feel really challenged by this idea of like, just go. Who knows, like if you go, you might meet a Kaladin. Like, you know, like you might actually, the thing that you need is on the journey, right? That's the whole thing. It's the journey for the destination. And I'm trying to map out exactly how I'm going to get to A to from A to B if I leave, you know.
Because the irony is that Dalinar needed a Kaladin, but until he met Kaladin and actually found Kaladin on the journey, in his mind, he would have probably been thinking, I just wish Amaram was here. Like if I just had Amaram, like then it would be good.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's crazy. Here's what this has me all thinking here as we're kind of getting up there in time. How does this connect to Shen culture? That's what we need to discover.
Wow, that is
yeah. And maybe it's because Dalinar needs the scales removed from his eyes to see clearly what's there in front of him. I'm making a segue here.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I'm realizing now that the topic that I picked is unrelated to all of the other topics that have been brought up. So let's talk about Shinovar. No, actually, so this is probably not the right place to bring this up, but I just figure might as well. Something that I thought was interesting. This is not about Shinovar, but there is I think it's like the last chapter in part 2, where Dalinar is Yasna asks Dalinar to recount his first encounter with the Parshendi. And he talks about how they went out to the forest to find some great shell, to start great shell hunting, and how they ran into them. So it's not really like a huge aha chapter or anything, but it stood out to me because, and here's like, this is a Rhythm of War spoiler. So if you don't want to know anything about Rhythm of War, you can like stop this. But
I don't know anything about Rhythm of War. What am I supposed to do right now?
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
just I mean, it's not a major spoiler. It's something that's out of that. It's a segment that Sanderson has read that's available for people to read. It's not like a major spoiler or anything.
But I haven't.
Here's your weekly spoiler warning for everything, even unreleased things.
Yeah. Anyways, I won't say anything about it except that there's a segment from Rhythm of War that Sanderson read to an audience, an excerpt, and it's connecting, it's relating back to that first encounter, the first meeting between Gavilar, Dalinar, and the Parshendi, but it's from the Parshendi perspective coming upon the human camp. So anyways, I just thought that was interesting. As I was reading that, I was like, hey, that's what he's talking about in Rhythm of War. Anyways, so Shinovar, yeah. So we also, including the finishing part 2, we also read through the second set of interludes, and I'm always fascinated by the first interlude is Risen, where she's an apprentice with Vistim, and they're in Shinovar, and this is like this is the first introduction to Shinovar, where we actually see the landscape and kind of meet the people there. But so this is the one part of Roshar where there's actually soil, where there can actually be farming and whatnot. But it's also a place where stone is considered to be holy. They don't walk on stone. And Seth even makes this comment when he's walking in Gavilar's, banquet hall. He realizes, well, it would be impossible for them not to step on stone because there is no soil here. But what's interesting is there's been all this speculation about, the third sibling. There's a mention of the 3 siblings, right? There's the Storm Father, and then there's the Night Mother. Is that her name? No. Yeah. The Night person.
Watcher.
And then there's a third sibling that they don't talk about, that's apparently like sleeping. And there's been speculation that sibling has something to do with the mountains or has something to do with stone, and that possibly the Shin and possibly even the Horn Eaters worship this sibling. But what was interesting to me was I started thinking about Oathbringer and how we finally meet the Thunderclasts in Oathbringer, these huge like stone monsters, which are apparently creations of Odium, and it would make sense if like Stormfather is connected to honor and the Night Mother is connected to cultivation, that the third sibling would be connected to Odium, but which would mean that the Shin I guess in some way worship odium.
Well, they consider all three things. Like they have religion around all three siblings because they consider Stormlight, like Seth, when he sees the Stormlight and the gems, he's like beautiful but profane. And they consider farmland. They don't let any outsiders go to the farmland. So the place where cultivation happens is also considered sacred.
Yeah. Yeah. Huh. So,
Is it the Shin culture that has something around like the highest thing is being a farmer?
yeah. Yeah. The farmers are honored. Yeah. In fact, they mentioned that in this interlude, how honorable it is to be a farmer. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the Shin and the Horn Eaters have this like interesting foil to like the Alethi, deification, if you will, of being a warrior, where both the Shin and the Horn Eaters like consider that like the lowest calling. Rock's like, that's for a fifth son or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
What do we know about Cardassian culture? Because if we're breaking down the people types or whatnot that seem non-human or somehow more Rosharian, that they're connected to the Earth, they seem to have almost evolved with Roshar to be able to withstand high storms. Like, you've got these burly Horn Eaters, and then the Cardassians that also it goes out of their way many times to talk about their fingernails as almost having like a carapace quality to them. Is that because they are, along with, I mean, I'm sure this is just a part of the Copper Mine that I haven't dove into enough yet, that this is all in there, like what the actual native of Roshar are.
Yeah.
And where do the Thalans fit in there? Are they different enough just for having long eyebrows? Like, because everyone else seems, I mean, then you have
the guys that can draw on their own skin.
Yeah, that's what I was just going to mention. Yeah, there are more.
Yeah, I mean, that would go along with other things that Sanderson has written. In other worlds, you have multiple races. You don't have just like a single race in the Mistborn series and whatnot. But
yeah, the Shin really kind of remind me of like they almost seem to play the same role or a similar role to elves in Lord of the Rings, where like the elves know all the stuff and so that like in the storytelling they're kind of like kept a little bit periphery so that mysteries can still be part of the narrative. And it seems like the Shin are in a similar place here where like they have the honor blades, they have a religion that seems to have some basis in like these great spren and so it seems like they're sort of like, we'll get there, we'll get into Shin eventually, they just know too much to be like front and center early on in the series.
Yeah, that's interesting because I was thinking that the Shin represented the Amish people of Roshar. Like they're they keep it simple. They stay close to the land, but
they have chickens.
Yeah,
I find the chicken thing fascinating because it seems that that's the only name for a bird that they know in Russia, which is fascinating. But is it, and this might be a spoiler, but isn't it, do we not discover in Oathbringer that basically Shinovar was where the, so to speak, humans came when they first came to the planet with odium? So the idea of what you were suggesting of there being this third, sibling and being connected to odium and maybe therefore connected to stone seems to make sense, and that the Shin would be aware of that seems to, you know, potentially fit with that that idea.
Yeah.
So the story that Shalon and Wit, right? They have that story about the girl who climbs up over the mountain, and which seems to be what that's about. Is about humans kind of leaving. But I'm just wondering, like, based on some of the other clues within the story, if they were more kicked out of Shinovar, like they're referred to as stone walkers because they profaned to walk on stone. And we know that the Shin seem to be prone to finding somebody who's truthless and then kind of exiling them. I wonder if that was, if the story was a little more complex, you know, which would also fit with Sanderson's MO of having kind of no real good guys and bad guys, but just like a complexity of issues that lead to things, you know.
Yeah.
If they came and unintentionally really offended their new hosts. Speculation.
Yeah. In some ways, that story could also apply to the Parshendi. I know that it doesn't, because that story is supposedly really, really old, but like the story that Sanderson reads as an excerpt of Rhythm of War, he talks about how the Parshendi had been isolating themselves and not interacting with the rest of Roshar, and how like Eshonai kind of broke that rule by going out, by wandering, and then ultimately discovering humans. But yeah, it seems like that's kind of a theme almost of
so like, who are the Voidbringers? Like, the answer isn't that it's either one.
Yeah.
It's almost kind of like, now this is going to get really theological here for a second. I hope this is okay. But it's almost kind of like, who is the Antichrist? Like as Paul talks about, well, there's Antichrist that exists in this day and always come. And like, I personally, like, my own theology of the Antichrist is it comes down to like that which works against Christ in your life. It, like, there's an Antichrist at work in you. And maybe there are big global examples of powers that work to supplant the role of Christ. But it's like, it's a spirit of Antichrist that's more the issue than just like an identity of one individual. Like, is there a spirit of the Voidbringer that, like, well, you come back to this point in history and you can be like, well, wow, the humans are kind of the Voidbringers. But then you get to a certain point where like some historian had to write down a note like about like, yeah, these are them. Like, you can even see it, the remnants of it in their marbled skin. Like, like there's.
It's a really interesting question, Rob, because in some ways, like, what are like, who are the bad guys is obviously like a pretty crucial question as we go through Oathbringer, but also like clearly Odium is like unquestionably in that bad guy camp. What does he even want? Like, Honor's dead, and Odium is just like trying to destroy, absorb something, the shards. Like, is this all just Odium going after cultivation? Like, what is sort of the what's the point of the desolations from Odium's perspective? Like, he's coming in and empowering and like deceiving and all of that. Like, what's he trying to accomplish in this?
Well, he's trapped in the Rosharan system because Honor had bound him there, and even though Honor is dead, Honor's continue the Oath Pact or whatever is binding him to the system still exists in whatever, through the Oath Pact or through the splintered Spren. So yeah, I mean, I think he's made it clear that he wants cultivation to die eventually. But I think his main goal is to break himself free from the Rosharan system, because I mean, I think he wants to be the only shard holder left, basically. I mean, I'm sure there's obviously a lot more to his motives, but I think he has specifically stated that much, that he wants to be released from the Rasharian system.
Yeah, I mean, it puts the Stormlight Archives in this really like interesting place where it seems like the main drama of the Cosmere, of like Odium going after the other people with shards, right now is like contained in the Rasharian system. It certainly has really interesting ramifications for, you know, the Cosmere as a whole.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just muted myself instead of unmuting myself. Prediction time. Can I make another Cosmere level theorized prediction?
Perfect.
You have 30 seconds.
The first 5 books of the Stormlight, what's the word for a set of 10? Dectuplet?
Decalogue.
Decalogue. There we go. I'm going to go with dectuplet. We know it's going to be broken into two parts, right? And that there's going to be a time gap, not a ridiculously long time gap, not like a Mistborn level time gap, like a time gap enough where our present characters will notably age, but many of them would still be around. I think that's what I was reading about it, that it's going to be a jump, but not like lifetimes jump.
Yeah, it's like 20 years, 10, 20 years.
Yeah. My prediction would be that this series, because we know that this series is going to, this and the Mistborn series are the ones that are the heart of the Cosmere story at large, that's going to tie back together with Dragonsteel and whatever that like all happens and goes down. And the last Mistborn set, whether it's going to be a trilogy or whatever it is, like that set is going to be the very end of the story, so to speak, kind of at the end of there. My prediction is that by either the end of the 5 books or definitely by the end of the 10 books, essentially the humans are going to lose and Odium is going to be set free, thus necessitating a Cosmere level story of Hoyd fixing this mess and like everything coming to an end. Like it seems like Thanos kind of has to win at least once, you know? Like the universe has to get put in peril again for the stakes to become universal again, which means the Rasharians are going to fail.
Huh.
Wow.
Well,
That sort of narrative would make quite an expansion on the idea of Dalinar's job to unite them.
Okay. Because we know that characters like Kelsier and Sazed can become bigger than their world and story and take on bigger prominence. Like Dalinar has already like taken Honor's perpendicularity and like harnessed the power of Honor himself to such a degree that like it's not beyond the scope of realm to think that Honor could essentially even be short-sighted in his vision of what Honor's trying to tell him. That we're not talking even radiance, we're talking shards.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, that's kind of an interesting thought, is like where Odium is killing the people that are holding the shards. Like, I mean, it certainly seems possible that Dalinar is on the way to sort of becoming the new shard bearer, like in a real sense, of Honor, which puts a whole new twist on sort of like just the whole shard bearer idea. But yeah, I mean, it like that idea of like that macro idea that really seems to me to have driven the story so far, of just like unite them. Like there's almost like a meta, like like Sanderson is telling himself, like, it's time to unite my cosmere to a degree, almost.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I'm looking at the time and I'm thinking this might be a great place to pause and to on that cliffhanger.
That is, but John, I don't know if there's just such a way to tie this together, though. Like it just.
How can we unite this?
Yes, what I'm wondering, like the question that I'm left wondering in the end, is how does Dalinar get the holders of the shards of anal nauseum around the campfire together?
Right.
Right.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
And what sun is that campfire?
Indeed. Oh dear. And who's making the stew? And are they allowed to put real horns in there?
I think I don't know who's making the stew, but it's clear that Hoyt is stirring the pot.
Yo. Wow, that was so cool. Well, I've really enjoyed this. It's been eye-opening. Thanks again. And my name is Jonathan. I didn't do this at the beginning. We have Rob, Brad, and Luke. And yeah, we'll see you back here next time.